Hey there coders, welcome back to Python Programs Python, the place where coding is not just a skill, but it's a lifestyle. Today we're diving into a topic that's quite easily misunderstood but extremely powerful when mastered. I'm talking about for loops and functions. Whether you're a seasoned developer or just starting out your coding journey, mastering for loops and functions is inevitable. They can help you simplify your codes and create an overall better structure for your system. Also, remember to subscribe and hit that bell for more epic videos like this. Grab your popcorn and let's go. Okay, so where we left off the last time was talking about if and else statements and how to make this entrance to the Penguin Club. That's what we did the last time. Now we're going to focus on functions and how functions actually work and how we can use these functions to try to simplify what we've made. So, the first thing we do, I'm going to open up a blank sheet just to explain what functions are. Now, let's say we have some number x equals 5. Now, within this number, we can add another number to it. We can have a code that does that for itself. So we can have a code that does y, let's say y equals x plus 1. And now if you print that out, print out y, we see what we get. If you print out y, we get 6. So essentially what we've done is we've taken that x equals 5 and we've added 1 to that x equals 5. That's completely fine. But let's say we want to do that multiple times in the code. So let's say we want to do it at another time called z. We want to add 1 more to x. We got to do that again. And we got to keep doing that multiple times. But there is a way to simplify that. And what we're trying to simplify is we're trying to simplify repeated functions or repeated code that we got to use multiple times. That's what a function does. A function is something you can recall that does a line of code to you every time you recall it. Okay, let me give an example. So this right here is the x plus 1 example. So we have defined x equals 5. Let's make a function. Let's call this add1. So you write def add1. You put these brackets, I'll explain later what they are, and you put these curly brackets at the end. And then you say, what do we want this function actually to do? And you can do two things. You can either write x plus 1, I'll explain how to define this, x plus 1, or you can do return, which is just going to return a value to you. Return x plus 1. Now, when you run this code, you're going to see something. Let's run the code first. So to run it, you would add 1, and you put the brackets behind it. And that's how you run the code. So let me try to run it, instantly try to run it, and you don't get anything down in the terminal. This is because when you run it with return, you don't get a specific print function out, but it comes into a value, which means you could basically write y equals add1 plus 1. And if you print out y, I can show you what I mean. We print out y function, we get 7. So when you use the return function, instead of being a name, add1 comes that value. So what it does is it takes x equals 5, it runs through, it skips over the define function. It doesn't run the function until you call it, and that's why it's so special. It skips over it, then let me show what I mean by it skips over it. So let's print out x first. Then I go y equals add1. So then it goes into the add1, adds 1 to x, and then adds another one. That's why when you see it first, it gets 5 and 7. And that's why these functions are so useful, is because you can run them multiple times. So if you want to add 1 more to x, underneath this, you just go y equals add1. And then when you run it again, it's going to add 1 more. That's why we can use these functions the way we do, and that's why they're useful for any code, is because they simplify it down so you don't have to do the same thing all over again. And you can just recall the functions when you need them. So mainly, when you have your main code running, you can have the functions in the background, not working, not running, but whenever you need them, you can just recall them. Now let me talk about another property within functions. And these are variables that you can give into functions. And this is kind of cool. So inside this parentheses we have here, we can add a variable, and that's why these parentheses exist. So let's say we want a variable y. No, let's say we want a variable k. Now, when we run this code, we're going to get an error because we're missing an argument, which is the k we're missing. K in this case is just a replacer of anything. It's not really anything specific, but it's a placeholder for something. So every time in this function, every time in this function we refer to k, we're basically referring to the thing we put into this originally. So let's say we want to return k plus 1. So now, essentially what we're saying is we want to run this add1 code with some number. Let's call this k, like I did. And then we wanted to just add 1 to that number. So now when you run the code, in order to make the code work, you're gonna have to do, okay, well, let's go add 1 to 5, and let's print that out so we get a value. So we go add 1 to 5, we get 6. Add 1 to 14, add 1 to 14, we get 15. That's why we use these functions. It's because every time you want to add something. So now you can run multiple codes. Let's say you had another code, and instead of doing the normal code and you want to just add 1, like 15 plus 1, you can do add 1 to 52, and it adds 63. And in this case, it doesn't simplify the code that much, because this might seem unnecessary, because right now we basically keep adding 1s, and we can basically just write that like 51, 52 plus 1. That'll be the same thing. But when you have a lot of code going on and a lot of lines, this becomes useful. So let's go back to our main thing. Let's go back to our main code and see how can we use what we know here to try to simplify this down. Okay, well, let's say we want to run this code multiple times, because this is an actual club. We want to do this multiple times. We don't want to check their age every single time. We just want to check their age when we ask them. So imagine you're at a bar and you're going into the bar, and the bartender asks you for your age. You don't want to constantly, every time you run it, ask for someone's age. You just want to ask for their age when they join and when they're in. So instead of doing this print if age, we can define that as check age. So this is every time you want to check someone's age. Now, in this, we can put in the code we already have, the if age is less than 18. Now, if age is greater than 18 and less than 50. But now we want to put in a value because we don't really know what the age is. So we check age, and inside the parentheses we put age. So this means we're expecting to write. So when we run the code, I can show you. We run the code, we're expected to write check age and the age of the person. And then it checks whether that's 18, below 18, or whether that's above 18, sorry, and below 50. Okay, that's perfect. So let's check for gender. Let's check if they're actually allowed in the club, because we want a good mix between males and females inside this club, okay? So instead of doing these else statements, like if and else statements, and it's getting all complicated here, we do another function. And we define this as check for gender. So check gender within this function system here. And then we can say, okay, we need to check if male and if female. So we can copy this code we have right in here. Good. So now this code is in. And remember, I also here wrote gender, because instead of doing the first thing where we did the name input, put your gender, here we just ask them straight up what's your gender. So when you write the code again, like we did before, you would write check gender male. And you would put in male. And that means you want to check if a male is allowed right now, not a female. And you can put in the other thing. And then the code is going to work like it's supposed to do. Then we want the last system to be done. We want the introduction. So the way we're going to do the introduction part is we are going to just take the first thing we had, the welcome to Club Penguin, and we want to go down here. We want to define this introduction place here. And then we just want to write print Club Penguin, and then we're going to ask for their name. str, we're going to ask for their what really is their name. I have these up here, so I can just copy these down. I'm going to ask for their name and their age. Nice. This looks perfect. So now, if you try to run this code, you're going to see one problem. Nothing happens. Well, if I remove these, there you go. Nothing happens. The code just exits. And this is because I haven't called a single function yet. So, at the end, we write a line to call introduction. Now, if you call introduction, we put the brackets at the end. We get the, let me try to colon this out. That's another way of doing something. If you want to colon out any code, you can put a hashtag, and that code isn't read by the computer. It's very useful for writing notes. So for example, if you wanted to do this and you want to define what a function is, you can put a hashtag here and say a function is used to repeat occurring lines. And then when it reads it, it won't come up with an error because it literally just won't read that line because you hashtagged it out. So you're telling it, do not read this. This isn't important. This is just for me. And it's mostly useful if you're making group projects. So let's say you're working on something and your other friend is also working on something. You would put a hashtag when you're writing something and you want to explain it to your friend. For example, I added the functions, maybe he doesn't know what it is. So I put a hashtag saying, I added a function here, I need to relook at it because there's a mistake in it. Something like that. That's why these are quite useful, and it's always useful when you're making a code for someone who hasn't seen it before, if you're making it for someone else, or just in general to keep track of what you're doing. Okay, but we run the introduction, and we ask for the name. Let's say the name is Bob, and the age is 21. Okay, perfect, that worked. But nothing else happens. So now we gotta figure out, okay, now we gotta run, check their age, and check their gender. So, you write check age, and we say check age of that person, and you could do two ways. You can either directly ask for their age now, so we can use that age function we already have here, or you could use it inside the function already. So you could have had one in here, so you didn't need this, but I just find it more useful and it looks neater. So check age with the age. So we run it through again, and we say, okay, my name is Bob, I am 21. That worked. We're allowed in. Perfect. If we then say, okay, well, my name is Bob, and I'm 55, I'm not allowed in, I'm too old. Perfect. You actually might want to add an else function here, like else print you're welcome. Print you're welcome in. Like that. So now when you run it, the person knows 24, you're welcome in. Perfect. Now, once this is run, and it didn't come out with an error, we want to run the check gender. Now, in order to make sure we can do this without coming out with an error, we can do two things. We can either give it a value, or we can run this code and then run the other one. I think giving a value makes more sense, so I'll explain what I mean. Essentially, you can have a code be a specific value, meaning you can define it for either true or false. And it's really useful when you're trying to make a condition. For example, do this if this. So, a good example, let me go back to my add1 plus k, and let's try to define something else. Let's say if k, let's do this, if k is greater than 5, then we want to return true. If k is less than 5, then we want to return false. So, what this means is that we put a function k in, and it checks if it's greater than 5 or less than 5. But if it's greater, let's say if it's greater than 5, the function is going to tell me that that's true. That function is true. And you can use that because you can write an if statement. So this is a conditional statement. We learned that in the previous video. If k, if add1 4, let's say add1 4, if add1 6, then print values lower than 5. If not, so you can say else, or we can make another if statement. Elif add1 3, print not good. So what this is gonna do is it's gonna go through the code and it's gonna check whether things make sense or whether it doesn't. So usually here it runs through and it checks, okay, did what I do here, was it true or was it not true? Now in this case, one is true and one is true and the other is false. So then it takes the thing, it takes the value, so this is 6, and then it checks whether 6 is true or whether 6 is not. So that's why you would write the if 6, and you write print not. So that means it's checking, is 6 true or is 6 not true for this function? And since 6 is greater than 5, 6 recalls, well, it must be true. If 6 was 3, if that function was 3 instead, it tells me that it's not true. Now, for our code, this is very, very useful because now we can set up conditions for ages. So we can say, okay, we have age, and we're asking it for the age. And now we want to know whether that age is valid or not. I've already printed out the function that is valid, but we want to write that and ask, like, we want a computer to know that it's valid or not. So we put that functions. So we're saying, okay, if you're less than 18, return false. If you're over 50, you also want to return false, because we don't allow those. And if you're not, return true. Boom. Now returns true. So now, we ask for the age, but instead we write if age. And that's essentially saying if age is true. So if age for age is true, then we ask for the gender, which is one I don't have here, but we ask for their gender. So we can do the gender.str of the input, and then we can say, well, are you male or female? Perfect. Done. So we ask them, are you male or female? And then we run the check gender function. Check underscore gender with that gender we just found. Okay. So now if we write, let me write an else if statement. So if that's not true, so we can say else print not in. So now when you run the code, put in the name Bob, I'm 21. Welcome in. So now what it did, and this is what we have to analyze now, is it said, okay, your name is Bob. We know that. You're 21. So then it takes the code, it runs it through the check age with 21. It goes up to the code and it sees, okay, it's above 18 and it's below 50. So we're printing the welcome in, that's what you see in the terminal, and we return that this function is true. So when you go down here and you say if age check age, and then the value it returned was true. So if that's true, that's what we're asking. So that's true. Then go gender, and that's immediately what it does. Then you can see the next line starts. Are you male or female? Let's say I'm female. Welcome into the club. So then it checks, it runs female here, and it sees that females in this club right now are actually allowed in. That's perfect. But we have a slight problem. Because let's say we want to add the number of females whenever they join in. So that's a big problem we have now. Right now we have 0 and 4. So we want to have that number of females, and we want to add that. That's one thing we can do right now. So we can welcome them into the club. But let's say we want to keep actually count of who is in the club and when they're in the club. Now what we're going to use now is texts, and we're going to make a file. So that's the next step. And I can show you how to do that right now. We go into an explanation folder, and we want to open a text file. And this is quite easy to do. So first you start up a line with open, and then you name the document. Let's call this just for sakes, let's call this let's say with open test.txt. Always want to call it txt, it's a text file this time. And then you put in some function after. Let's put w, and I'll explain later what this is as f. Okay, what did I just do? Essentially, I'm saying we want to open a text file called text.the. That's the with open. And then I write comma w. The w stands for, okay, I want to write in this file. So not only do I want to add, so you can have two things. You can either have read the file, which is R, append the file, which is A, or write in the file, which is W. Right now, let's say we want to write in the file. So if you run this, let's say we want to, right now we don't even know what we want to write, but let's say we want to write something like hello. The way you do that is you write f.write. The f is what we opened it with. That's why we say with open as f. So now the file is called f, and in every command you write f.append, f.write, then it just writes in that file. So let's write hello. If you run this code, this is what's so amazing about Python. If you run this code, look on the left, a txt file popped up. You can open it up, we have a file called hello. In that, we have a hello. That's amazing. So now we created a txt file, then hello. But now we got a problem. Because let's say underneath, we have this open. Let's say I want to open it again another time, and I want to write something else. Let's say I want to write another thing. Let's say I want to write cola. Now, the problem here is that it rewrite over. It doesn't keep what it originally wrote. This is the function of write. Now, if you don't want to use that, if you actually wanted to append it, that means you want to write multiple things in this list. You use A for append. So if I write append, then you're going to see cola, hello, cola. If I delete it again, you can redo it, and you see hello, cola. But that kind of looks bad, and it's not really organized. So let's make a line shift between them. So let's make one above another. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a shift in the line. The way you do that in Python is you write \n. \n just means next tab. You can do this really in any print function. So let's say you're printing something, and you want to write find my, and then you write next tab, so \n. You can see it highlights in orange. That just means it's gonna do that. That just means it's gonna go for that. And you write hello. Good. If you then run the code, now it's gonna write find my and then dash hello underneath. That's perfect. So, for our text in this case, we can use this line shift to make structure in our text. So, the way we're going to do that in our text is we're going to add a backslash after the hello, like you saw here. We had that backslash, and then we make a line underneath that backslash. So now, if you write explanation, it's going to go hello, and it's going to go cola. So every time there's like a backslash in between them. That's going to be useful if you want to add a person, because we can make it like an ordered list, which is what exactly we're trying to look for. So let's go back to our code and use this in order to write names in. It's not going to be that much more complicated because we already learned how to add numbers with F strings, but it's just going to be a bit more steps. Nothing more. Okay, so this is when we say they're welcome into the club. That's the final step. That's when they have gotten accepted and everything's good. Now, print welcome, and now we open a new text file. Let's call this a new text file, just so we have something new. Let's call this database.txt. And again, we want to write the A for append because we want to write multiple names. We want to open that as F. No, you don't always have to open this as F. I do it for simplicity because it's easier, but you could also just write open. But here, we open it as F. Now, once we've opened it as F, we do the f.write. But what exactly do we want to write in here? Now, what I was thinking we're going to write is we're going to write name, comma age, comma gender. Just so we know like who is in this class. And we know the name, and we know the age, and we know the gender. So, we can make it two ways. We can do this. Name dash, and let's make this an S string. You can do those in within write text as well. It doesn't really matter. And then we do name, comma, age, which is the next thing we do. Which is going to be age, and the next thing we're going to do is going to be gender, which is also just going to be dash, which is going to be dash gender. Now, here comes a problem, and that's if I try to run this won't work. And you can see the red underline under age. It means under name and age, it's not defined. And that's weird, right? Because we have name and age here, so it should be defined and it should have a value, but it doesn't. And that's why functions are special as well. It's because function doesn't give a defined value for anything. So when you write something, let me show you what I mean. If you write like x equals 5, x equals 4, and you define some value, let's call this add1. It doesn't necessarily have to be add1. And then you use another value, y equals 2, and then you recall y in a later place, that won't necessarily be true. So if we print out y, this right here is gonna work, I think. See, no, it didn't. I was wrong. It told me name error. Name y is not defined. So it tells me there's no place in this thing that is defined, because within each function, it has its own loop in that sense. It doesn't follow the normal curve. That means you can define anything within a function, and it won't disrupt anything. So here I can say x equals 5, and then I can print out x. Right now I won't change anything, because it's not called. But I could print out add 1, and still it would just tell me none. So the whole thing is, it can't take from other functions into what it already has. It would just tell me that it's not defined. So if I do name equals Bob, and then I try doing another one that defined hello, and I try to use that name, so print name, and let's try that first run, add 1 up, and let's run hello after. It's gonna tell me name is not defined. Now there's one function I use usually to get away with this, and it's short for globalizing. So instead of making it like a specific within a function, we can globalize the name. So you want to write global, and you want to write name. So essentially you're saying global, short for globalize this variable name. That means in this function, name equals Bob, and we want every other place to also know that the name is Bob. So if I run the code now, it's going to print out Bob. Means Bob has been globalized. Now every single function knows that it's Bob. This is what we're going to use in here, because you see how age and name is not defined? It's because it's not in this function, it's local, and it's not defined. So down here when we define name and age, we want to globalize it. So write global name, comma age. Now the red lines are gone, because now these two names are globalized, so they all know what name and age is. You don't really need to do it for gender, because gender is within that thing. But if we go to main and we try to run the code, name Bob, age 21, and I'm a female. Welcome to the club. But now we have to check, did it actually write what I wanted to write on the thing, on the database? Yes, it did. Name Bob, age 21, gender female. And just for sake, I'm going to delete this, and we're going to add the backslash. So next time we add someone, we need it to be underneath that. So Bob, name 21, and females. And let's do it twice. And this is a very important part I'm going to get to. Let's call it name Lily, age 25, female. Good. So you see how now it has the both names, Bob and Lily. But I ran the code twice, and it shouldn't be able to remember. And that's why we use text files. It's to remember. Because essentially, whenever you run the code, you start it from 0. So everything else, every variable you've ever defined, it gets deleted, and it starts over from 0. But when you have a text file, you can add something into a text file, and that text file won't restart. Meaning, I can keep adding names, and I can keep running this code every single time a person joins, and that thing is just going to get into a database. And I won't have to redo it, and it won't refine name. It's just in there, and then it starts over. And again, that's why we use text files, because we can store information in them. And it's amazing to be able to store these informations. But for the last concept, for the while loop concept, we want to have a way of, instead of rerunning the code every single time we have to add someone's name, we want to keep going until we say we don't want to add anyone else. So, again in my explanation, we want to add a while loop. While loops is saying, while something is happening, do this. And only this function, and then keep going until it stops. So let me do this. While, I'll do a very easy one. While true. We're saying while true, print hello. If I run this, it's going to keep printing hello for infinity. So I'm not going to run it very fast, but look. It wrote hello a million times, because it doesn't end. If I write hello, print hello, and then we write false, then it's going to keep going and keep going and keep going. So instead of using false, which we've used before, we want to use break. It stops the code. So in this function, you can print hello, and you can do that for ever until you want to break it. Now, one way of knowing how long you want to do it is two ways. I do it by adding a counting system. So you put count equals 0, and then you say while count is less than 7. Now, while count is less than 7, print hello, and add 1 to count plus equal 1. This means every single time I want it what it's equal to plus 1. So now I go ahead, it should print out hello, and it should print out hello. I want to delete break because we don't need that right now. It should print out hello 7 times and then it stops. So what it does is it goes while 7, print hello, then it prints hello once, that's the first time, and then it adds 1 to the count, and then it goes back up and it says, okay, now count is 2, so now we print hello again, now count is 3, and it does it all the way until count is not true. So to use this in our text, in our data, we can go back to the introduction, and we can say, okay, we need to add something with their name. So here, so we need to add a while loop. So I'm just going to indent all this, and I'm going to add a while. Let's do the while true. That seemed to work. While true, and we want to print this, and we're going to ask for the name, and we're going to check if age, and we're going to check the gender, and we're going to check the gender, and then else, if the age didn't work out, and if nothing worked out, we wanted it to keep running again. So instead of else, we're just gonna define another person, and we're gonna write an input. So then now we're asking the person making the code, do you want to check in another person? Yes, yes / no. Let's again do dot lower. It's always really good to write them no. If another person equals no, meaning I do not want to add someone else, then we should break it. If it doesn't, well, let's just keep going, and that's what we do. So I read through this. It says if another equals no, then break, and if it equals yes, then it just skips over this line and starts over again. So now if we run the main code again to do this, we can see name Bob, age 21. I'm in. Bob, age 21 is in. Well, we need to put the in gender. Female. Another Bob, name, age 21, female. He's in. He's in this system. And then it asks me here at the bottom, do you want to check in another person? And say, yes, we do. We want to check in Cole, and his age is 12, so he can't even be allowed in this club. Tells me he's not allowed, he's too young. Then it asks me again. I say, yes, we want to check in Lars, age 34, and he's also female. Welcome to the club. Do you want to check in another person? Let's say we don't want to check anyone else in. We put no, the code ends. This is how easy functions and for loops can be, and how useful they can be, because we added so much more depth and so much more things to a file. First of all, we learned how to do functions, so we added more structure to it, and we added a concrete, more or less, a concrete structure. So if we add more into this code, we have different sections we can come to. So like if you wanted to check their age twice, because we might be questioning if they're the right age, or if you wanted to check their gender again, or something like that, we can go back and do that. We also learn how to store their data and store everyone who's in there on an actual text file that we can use to know who is in the club and who is not in the club. And we learned how to use while loops for first counting numbers and keep an action going, but also just to keep your code running until you want to end it. And that was the second part of my Penguin Club, where we have made it better, simpler, and overall just gotten better at coding.